This is a book review of the X-Men Epic Collection Volume 2, Lonely Are the Hunted by Thomas Roth Heck Tusker. Now, this book came out in 2016 and it includes about 500 pages, predominantly all in colour. There's some bonus material at the back. So Volume 2 covers the period 1966 to 1968 and includes X-Men 24 to 45. Also, the Avengers 53, not Brand Echh 4 and 8. So all this period, obviously the 60s, you've got the original X-Men there, and of course you've got the list of all the various epics that were available at the time, obviously in 2016, and here's the list of all the letterers, colorists, and all the people involved in production of this comic. So obviously, mostly the artists there, Werner Roth, Don Heck, George Tusker, Ross Andru, and Jack Sparling, and also written mainly by Roy Thomas. There's a bit by Gary Friedrich as well. So here's a quick review of this book. There's a right mix of stories in this book. I have to say it's a really odd period for the X-Men. I guess that's why, of course, they cancelled the X-Men in the end. So it finished obviously in issue 66. Now this is like the mid-period of this, and there was some really good. I really liked some of the stories. Like I say, some of the like the Locust. I enjoyed that one. I expect lots of people didn't like that, but I actually genuinely enjoyed that one. So I'm just going to quickly run through the stories. So the first one is the Locust one. That's why I mentioned it. Now, of course, the villain, I don't think he ever turned up again. I'm certain he's one of those characters, a one-off villain. But the reason I like it, it appeared in one of the annuals that I used to get, a UK one. And it was just because of that, I just love that issue. So you've got a great little story. And you've got the X-Men as obviously Professor X is still around at this point. There's a bit of, obviously, Professor X dies in this. I don't know if I'm giving any spoilers away. Professor X dies in this. It's actually probably on the back as well. As they grieve, their leader is killed. As it says, Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants also turn up. The complete Factor 3, which was always a bit of a silly saga. I must admit, the Factor 3 saga never did much for me. That was the middle bit that I just didn't like. So you've got this guy, obviously, develops his sort of like Ant-Man, where he's got control over various things, obviously locusts. It'd be strange if it was over spiders. I'm the Locust Man, but no, I control spiders. That wouldn't make any sense, would it? So you've got here, this is a character that was quite an interesting one here, featuring the menace of El Tigre. So you've got El Tigre there. And, well, the power and the pendant. So what happens, he's got this split pendant. Obviously, he finds he's got superpowers once, obviously, he's got the power of this pendant. Actually, El Tigre turned up later in a really quite good set of stories in Ka-Zar. I love those ones. So that was quite a way off. But you had El Tigre at this point. Very unusual story. You've got the usual story, of course. They were still having problems with the X-Men being, of course, not particularly liked at this point. They were always, as it says, obviously, lonely are the hunted. Clearly there was problems and those sort of storylines continued for quite a while. So you've got here the power of, whatever, I'm not even going to try and say that. But you've got this Tigre and he becomes pretty powerful at this point. But of course, in the end, of course, he gets beaten. How surprising. Then you got on to the next story. Re-enter the Mimic. And I really liked the Mimic character. I have to say, the Mimic character, and actually at this point, I really liked the artwork as well. Werner Roth, very, very basic artwork. It's not like a complex layouts, you know, they're all like 6-panel, sort of, you can just see there, 6 panels. But I really liked the Mimic. And it was a good story. And I always felt really quite sorry for the character because he could have had his own comic for, you know, he could have mimicked a number of other powers or whatever. And but then they didn't have those sort of solo issues back then, unfortunately. So you've got the Puppet Master as well. Characters that was always a non-character as far as I'm concerned. However, moving on from that, you got the Whale of the Banshee, who of course also became obviously a hero in the end. But at this point, he was more a villain character, though there was a particular reason for that. So just wait till you meet the ogre. Really? I don't know. It wasn't particularly a character that I'm not certain he ever turned up again. It's near enough in that same class, sadly, as the Toad. The Toad turned up. No, I don't know if the Toad turned up occasionally. I remember there was a good one with Generation X where he did turn up, I think. So so Toad does occasionally turn up. But I don't think the ogre has. Might be wrong on that. However, on to the next story, which I really, one of my favourites, actually, of this period. I love this one. And this is the Super Adaptoid. And I love these sort of scenes. Something that I think Marvel, I would love to see more often, but they don't always do this. Maybe nowadays probably don't do it at all, because often in these stories they're straight into battle, or it's some sort of weird 4,000 issue complex storyline that doesn't afford for these sort of very enjoyable little going skating. Something just as simple as that. To treat it like comics, a soap opera, basically, a soap opera. So just the story. And of course, you've got the Super Adaptoid just after his, obviously, AIM, the Captain America story. At this point, he's got the powers, obviously, of the Avengers. He's got, weirdly, I always think with the powers of the Avengers, he's got a slightly unusual shield. It's not like a circular shield. He's got more like the old Captain America shield from the very early Golden Age period. But you've got the Mimic, which of course is a very similar character, so it's quite interesting that they brought in Super Adaptoid at this point. Then, I have to say, the artwork in this one, Jack Sparling and John, I can't say his name, Tartaglia. My apologies for saying his name completely wrong. I have to say the artwork was brilliant. However, it sort of brings back Warlock, a sort of like a character that was part of, the Merlin story, Thor. So you've got obviously a very dramatic scene there at the front on the cover. But the artwork itself, and also the story was just all over the place. I just didn't like that story. That was a bit, and again, it was a period where, and then they ended up with a sort of like Iron Man character here. Now let's go to this one, Cobalt Man. Cobalt Man, which I don't know if he ever turned up again, but however, we must destroy the Cobalt Man. What a great title. Really? Really? I mean, he was one of your friends, so he was just unfortunately, but we must destroy him. Bit dramatic title. However, obviously got the Danger Room as usual. That starts the story, but it's quite a nice little story, the Cobalt Man. Actually, I did like that. Then on to one of my favourite characters, at this point anyway. I think after a while you get to the point where I'm not that sort of loyal to characters, but I really enjoyed every time the Juggernaut turned up. It was like a special villain. Real special villain, and here he is, obviously, in a slightly less brilliant issue, this one. Obviously, you've got Professor X messing around in a way that he shouldn't be messing around. He's obviously trying to help, but it doesn't, of course. But you've got a great crossover with Doctor Strange in the next story, and I love that. Good old Doctor Strange, and you've got the Scarlet Circles of Doom, as you always do. A bit like Sabrina. I'm just watching the Sabrina where they've got all these sort of these mystical domains and things. Love all that sort of stuff. So then onto the Molman. Probably have to say Molman is not one of my favourite characters. War in the World, and Tyrannus as well. War in the World of Darkness. You've got the story. That was a bit of a non. I love it. New heights of artistic comes from. Actually, I love Dan Adkins' artwork. It's quite a sort of like reminds me always of Wally Wood. There's always those shadows and things. But I have to say that story did nothing for me. Now, this one you've got Banshee turns up again, and you've got Spider-Man. So it's a nice little crossover. Two stories, really. Well, obviously the earlier one with Doctor Strange, and now with Spider-Man. It's a bit of a, maybe they were feeling the series was not really doing as well sales-wise. I don't know, but obviously it sort of must have, because clearly the series was eventually cancelled. So I guess that this was an attempt bring in a few guest stars. Maybe they should have done this a bit more, because they've got Spider-Man here, but really you could have had Daredevil, you could have had Captain Savage, Sergeant Fury, they could have had Time Travel Story or something. But then you end up having this one. Again, was a bit similar to the other story, actually. This one, Meccano Lives, which is a bit like the Cobalt Man to me. Basically, that was a bit of a non-story. Meccano Man. Actually, because, of course, we've got Meccano, sort of the toys you get and Meccano kits. And that always reminded me of that. Don't know why, but that was the reason. So you've got that story. And then we got Factor 3, which was quite nice in some ways, even though the story left me a bit cold. But it did introduce again good old Blob and also Mastermind, etc. And what was the other one? Oh, good old Unus as well, and good old Vanisher as well, which is quite nice to see that he actually survived, because, of course, he had problems in the second issue of the X-Men when that was a classic story there. So you got that story. Again, I would say it was a bit of a messy story, and it sort of, the conclusion was a bit of a nod. However, what they did do in this, which was very odd, they introduced the origins. So you had like these suddenly origin stories. I'm not certain that was just an odd thing as well. With in terms of, was it desperation to put these, or maybe they just felt that they never really gave the origins of these people, like Cyclops. Where did they come from? Because obviously the first story you had like Magneto, and that was it. You got straight into the story. You had Vanisher, you had the Blob, you had obviously the Magneto, quite a few Magnetos, Sentinels, but you never really felt, you had a little bit about the origin, because obviously you had the Juggernaut story where they gave a bit of background to, but you didn't really find out much about, say, Marvel Girl or Iceman, and obviously now the origins of the X-Men. But they did similar, of course. They did one in the Thor one. They had the Inhumans, the origins of the Inhumans. So I guess there was a realisation that some of these various stories never had any origins. So they just put them in. So they were okay, but just odd. These are odd stories. And in some ways, I wish this Epic Collection, unfortunately, the Epic Collection put them in order of the book. So in the comic, so it would just, I would have preferred them all to be at the back. So it would have been a nice continuous run of origin stories, because the stories were actual stories that continued on in some cases. So it would have been nice if they had just done all together, and then you would have read them as a nice flow. Instead, they were all split up as stories. I know that was how they were released, but I would have preferred them slightly spread out differently. However, you got good old Banshee back again, and Lonely Are the Hunted. Obviously, that's weird. They've actually chosen that story, that one there, Lonely Are the Hunted, to be the cover for this book. How odd. That's for, obviously, Cyclops. Then you had a real non-story, as far as I got, the Frankenstein, the monster lives, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the first Evil Mutant, which strictly is not true, because, of course, well, the film, etc. We know other characters did come out earlier, and I expect Marvel, of course, introduced many other mutants a lot earlier than this one. This also is a character, Grotesque. Now, that story led on to, of course, the famous scene where, I'm not spoiling it says it on the back, so this is not really much of a spoiler. The leader dies, it says there, Professor X. And also you've got Living Diamond in that story. If I should die, big clue there. I mean, really, that's how you make certain that you really tell the story. The death of Professor X. I wonder what's in this issue. No, this is not an imaginary issue. This is for real. Yeah. Unless, of course, it's a clone or something. That's, the story obviously changes. In Marvel, quite often characters get killed. Mysteriously, they're not dead. They're in an alternate universe. They've been doing what's name. They've been this, they've been that. Who knows? However, great, you got this story. The torch is passed, and you got Magneto, time to attack, and you've got Quicksilver and Wanda. So you've got a nice little bit with the Avengers, and that leads on to the crossover story, a really good crossover story. And there's actually a couple of crossover stories, because you've got that story with Magneto, obviously. I love that battering ram there. And you've got Cyclops again. And then Red Raven. So it's really nice sort of time with Red Raven. This is one thing with Roy Thomas. He always brings in some of the old characters, which is always surprising in many ways that he brought Red Raven back, but he didn't, like Miss America or thousands. I mean, there's literally, in the Golden Age, there were thousands of really good one-off characters. I was just looking today, I was just looking through the Mystic comics. And Mystic comics, there's some real good stories in there, real have a charm and thoroughly enjoyable, and characters that could have been, looked at again and developed and created into some pretty awesome characters. Obviously, there was the 12 where they did bring some of those sort of characters back, but it's, Red Raven was obviously a good choice because he only appeared once, as far as I was aware, in the old Golden Age. But so you got him into the storyline, and then you got the story here, the sense-shattering Cyclops, when mutants clash. Now, you've got obviously Quicksilver and all that sort of stuff, the storyline there. Also, you've got a lovely origin story. You've got the good old Iceman there, and he's looking more like a snowman. Maybe he should have been called Snowman in the initial stories. But, it's because he was a bit more fluffy snow there. And then you had a great story with the Avengers, which I loved, that crossover story. Kill the Avengers. Yeah. battle in battle joined. So you've got the good old Avengers there. And then that's it. Well, except for the bonus material at the back. And I'm just going to quickly miss that because I don't want to show the end. I don't want to show the end of any of these stories. It's always tried. It's very easy to accidentally show it. I don't like showing it. I just love to show, if nothing else, just the cover. Because, read the stories because they're really good stories in some cases. The Magneto one, I loved the Magneto one. That was a real favourite story. I loved and it was great to see Magneto back again because he sort of disappeared for a long period of time. So it was nice to have that storyline with Magneto. And I've always enjoyed Magneto. I would love to see a Magneto collection. Obviously, recently we've had the Mephisto one, and you'd think Magneto deserves a good old collection, sort of a supervillains complete collections set. Now, you've got Magneto here. That's why I was mentioning Magneto. You've got the X-Men, obviously not Brand X. I love those. Love those stories. I've got the Marvel Masterworks, that one, and I just love those stories. Scarlet Witch is slightly in a bad state there. However, then you've got some extras at the back. Obviously, the usual. So there is some black and white pages in this, but you've got some of the unused covers. And sometimes when you look at the unused covers, you can actually see why they didn't use them. It's I have to say that one, the Outcast. I mean, that was, and also that one, the Juggernaut as well. You can really see why they rejected. I guess at the time, obviously, it was, but you can see that if you want to make certainly X-Men look really big, the last thing you really want to do is have these sort of the main villains sort of crunch up the whole page. Likewise here, very confusing bit in this one, unused art. You've got the Blob and things. You really can't make out much of the story there. And then, we've got some more other bits as well. Like I said, they were often tweaked as well. I love that one as well. You've got the obviously characters coming through there. You've got obviously Frankenstein waiting. And I love this one as well. The X-Men t-shirt at the back. Really quite nice. I would love to have got some of those t-shirts. I've always looked in the comics and used to get the adverts. And you have the Avengers and you have sort of the X-Men or Sergeant Fury one or something, or even a Million Model or something. And you think, I wish I'd buy one of those. But of course, being in the UK, the idea of ordering stuff from the States, would they have ever turned up? I'm certain they would have done. Of course they would have done. But it's just, certainly when I was a youngster, that would have been a lot of money to send money in the hope that something couldn't turn up. So I never got any of those sorts of things, which is a pity because I did sort of think, that would have been nice. However, what a lovely collection. Not 100%, not all the stories are brilliant. Like I said, the Factor 3 story was a bit messy, I found. Frankenstein's story, Grotesque, comes to mind. There's a couple of sort of non-stories. There were a few non-stories. Or but there were like the Colbert Man, Locust, all those sort of characters. I really genuinely, Super Adapter one, I genuinely enjoyed those. So this one, X-Men Epic, it's Volume 2. Of course, Volume 3 is coming along. Brilliant artwork from Neil Adams. And for me, Volume 3 and Volume 4 are extra special. I love those volumes. Volume 2, maybe not so much, but still totally recommended.